Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, we'll be learning about arrays in Java. So what exactly is an array? An array is technically an object that holds data of the same type. Okay, so think of it like a carton of eggs. So when you go to the grocery store, right, and you get a carton of eggs, they usually come in two rows, right? It's two rows of eggs, but for a second, just imagine it only has one row. So one row of eggs, and you have one egg after the other. That's sort of what I picture when I think of an array.
Arrays have three important rules. Number one, once the size of the array is set, you can't change it. Number two, they can only hold things of the same type. And number three, you must start counting from 0. Here, you'll see that I can't really shrink or grow the size of the carton without breaking it. You'll also notice that I'm adding screws of different sizes, but yet they are all screws, meaning they're all of the same type. This carton has a size of 6, but if we want to access an index or spot, we'd start counting from 0.
Other things that may resemble an array are things like those weekly pill reminder things, or even a single row ice tray. But here, let's go over some examples to see what they look like in actual code. So I have two examples here. Here's the first one, and here's the second one. And they both sort of do the same thing. We're creating an array, and then we're populating it with data, meaning we're inserting data into the array. So here in the first example, you'll see the comment up top. It says create array, then populate. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. You'll see that on line 7, I'm creating an array. Now, let's take a closer look at the syntax to see how we do that. I start off by specifying the data type, okay? Now, the thing about arrays is that they can only hold data of the same type, meaning if your array is of type string, it can only hold strings. If your array is of type int, that means it can only hold ints. You can't mix and match. You can't have an array that holds half strings and half ints. That's not possible, okay? So if you set it to strings, you can only insert strings. If you set it to ints, you can only insert ints, okay? Okay, so anyway, I start off by specifying the data type, and then here I type in the opening and closing bracket to let it know that I want to create an array, okay? And then here I create my variable name, okay? So this is what's going to hold the array. Uh, Now it might be a good idea to name it after the type of data that you're going to be inserting into it. So obviously here you'll see that I'm going to insert the names of foods. So pizza, burger, chimichanga. So it made sense to name it foods, right? Here I have an equal sign, and then here I have the keyword new, because remember, an array is technically an object. So it makes sense that we're using the keyword new because we're creating a new object. And then here we specify the data type one more time, and then we have the opening and closing brackets with a number in the middle. So the number in the middle is the size of the array, okay? In other words, this is how many items it can hold max. So right now I have the number 3, which means it can only hold a maximum amount of 3 items. So you can make the size of the array whatever you want. You can make it 100 or 10 or 7, or in this case, just 3. But keep in mind that once you set the size of the array, you cannot change it later on in the application. Okay, once it's set, it's set. So this is super important. Make sure you know how big you want your array to be. All right, so that is how you create an array. And then here on line 8, what I'm doing is I'm inserting a string at index 0. Okay, and what I mean by index, I mean like the first slot. Okay, so if you're thinking of the egg carton analogy, it's the first slot at the very beginning of the carton. Okay. All right, so here I'm inserting pizza into index 0. Now let's take a closer look at the syntax on how to do something like this. So you start off by typing the name of the variable, which in this case it's foods. Then you have your opening and closing brackets. And then in between, you specify the index that you want to access. Okay. So if you're trying to access index 0, then you type in 0. And then here we have the equal sign, and then followed by the string that you want to insert into that slot or in that index. Okay. And then here on line 9 and 10, I'm pretty much doing the same thing, only on different index. And of course, the data that's being inserted there is different. So here I'm inserting the string hamburger into index 1. I'm inserting the string chimichanga into index 2. Now what we can do here on line 16, I have a print statement, okay? And we can type in the name of the array, foods, and then if we specify the index, it'll grab the item in that index. And because we are using the print statement, it'll print it out onto the console window. So let's go ahead and try to access the item at index 0. So if we go ahead and run this, you'll see that it prints out the word pizza, right? And it makes sense because here we inserted pizza at index 0. So when we try to access index 0, we get pizza, okay? Now let's see what happens if we try to access index 3. So if we go ahead and run this, you'll see that we get an exception, or more specifically, an array index out of bounds exception, okay? Now the reason we're getting this is because there is no index 3. There's index 0, 1, and 2, right? But there is no index 3. Now the array is of size 3, meaning it can hold a maximum amount of 3 items, okay? But there is no index 3 because remember, when we're counting in an array, we always start from 0, okay? So this right here is not possible because the array is only of size 3. There is no index 3. The last index of this array is actually index 2, okay? All right, so here on the second example, you'll see up on top, I have the comment that reads, create array and populate all at once. And then here on line 13, that's exactly what I do. I create an array and I populate it with data. So it's very similar to the first example, except we're doing everything on just one line. Okay, now let's take a closer look at the syntax on how to do this. So we start off by specifying the data type, and then we have the opening and closing brackets. Then here we create the variable name, which in this case is colors, okay? And then we have the equal sign. And then here we have our opening curly brace, and inside we have the items that we want to insert into the array. And notice how they're all separated by commas. So I have 4 pieces of data here. I have orange, blue, green, and gray. And then I close it off by using a closing curly brace and a semicolon. Now you're probably wondering, well, why did you have to specify the size of the array here in the first example, but not here in the second example? Well, the reason for that is because since we're creating everything right from the start, we're adding the data right from the start, it knows how big the array has to be. So here it's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 items in it, so it knows that colors will be of size 4. Now what we can do is we can type in the name of the array here, colors, and we can access the items in that array the same way we were doing it with the previous array. So if we want to access the item at index 0, we'll go ahead and run that. And you'll see that we get the item orange, which is here, right? This would be index 0, this would be index 1, index 2, and index 3, okay? So index 0, 1, 2, and 3, but it would have a size of 4 because it can hold a maximum amount of 4 items. Again, if we try to access the item at index, let's say 10, we'll go ahead and run this. and you'll see we get an exception, or more specifically, an array index out of bounds exception. Okay, and the reason for that is because we're trying to access an index that does not exist. The reason we can't access this is because the array is only of size 4. Okay. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Here, we're creating the array and populating it on separate lines. And then here on this line, we're creating the array and we're populating it with data all at once. Okay. All right, so hopefully that made a little bit of sense. That's all for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Thanks.